So today we're going to be taking a look at what might happen when Sweden and Finland join NATO. Now if you haven't been keeping up with the news, as of recently, Sweden and Finland have both applied to join the Northern Atlantic Treaty Organization, and this is due to Russia's attack in Ukraine. So with Russia's invasion, the security of these two countries has been rethought by their leaders, and both countries have jointly applied to join NATO. Now with this, we obviously have a very big enlargement of NATO. Finland and Sweden are both big countries, and they also have strong militaries. So with this, we have a big buff going towards NATO in the near future. Now the only counter to that would be Turkey, who has said that they will veto a NATO membership for both of the Nordic countries, and that is unless they do some things to which something to do with terrorism. I don't know, I haven't really looked into it. It's kind of confusing. But with these two countries joining NATO, what would Russia's response be? Now Russia has stated that it would respond if these two countries join NATO, and well, they've done just that, sort of. They've applied, and Russia has done nothing about it but cut off gas supplies. So would we see a military response in real life? Probably not, but we're going to be taking a look at a scenario where there is a military response. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel for new. It helps our channel grow and it helps us reach our goals. And let's go ahead and get right into the scenario. So first off, the day after we have Finland and Sweden submitting their application to NATO, we have Russia declaring war on Finland. Now, as I stated, this is a what if scenario. Obviously in real life, Russia has not done such a thing and it will most likely not do anything about it. So already, if you're thinking that this video is going to be based off of realism, you might want to throw that out the window. Now these two countries do have a history together, and that is the two winter wars, in which there was a stalemate in both and neither country was really forced to surrender. For the most part, Finland just lost land to Russia and that was about it, but the Finnish did hold out on their own against the Soviets, so them against modern day Russia would probably maybe play out the same way. But since Russia is the aggressor here, we have them pushing into Finland at first. Now the only thing with this is that Finland has been preparing for this. Now in real life, before they submitted their application, their army was on alert and they were preparing for a possible Russian invasion. Now as we know, that didn't take place, but we do still know that they were prepared. But even considering that, we still have the Russians pushing in. Now this is the full Russian army. This isn't like Ukraine where they're only using a third of their army or something like that. They're using their entire army here to invade Finland. I'm not saying that it would be much better than the occupants in Ukraine, but it would probably perform the same as Ukraine, but there would be a lot more logistics and just a lot more involvement. So we can safely assume that they would be able to do some damage to Finland here, and we'd most likely have them pushing down towards Helsinki in the south. Now, what is the world's response to this? Well, there's going to be some interesting responses. First of all, we have Sweden, who is mobilizing their army in order to go help out Finland. We also have Norway doing this, as all three of these countries share a very close relation. But we also have the United Kingdom, who declares war on Russia in respect to a defensive pact they have with Finland. Now, right before Finland officially announced its bid to join NATO, the UK and Finland did sign a defensive pact together, stating that if Finland were to be attacked by the Russians, then the UK would come to its aid, and they have done just that here. Another country in which has signed a defensive pact with Finland is the United States. So yeah, now Russia is a little bit in a pickle here because they are at war with some of the top 10 strongest countries in the world, the United States and the UK, and then of course they're at war with their old pal Finland. Now, as due to these new countries joining in on the side of Finland, we have Belarus joining in on the side of Russia, as this is, given. They are the closest allies they have for each other, so they would obviously join in for the help of each other. That sounded weird. But let's not also forget about the war in Ukraine here, in which looks something like this, I believe, although I'm not too sure about the whole Donbass area. I think Ukraine has more land over here, but that doesn't matter because Ukraine is in the war either way. Now, what about Sweden, who is mobilizing as well as Norway? Well, like I said, they're mobilizing, so they're not going to join in just yet. But we do have the Russians making an offensive, in a very large offensive at that, in the north, which cuts Finland into two pieces, and this is not good for the Nordic country. Swiftly, all of the northern half falls over to Russians, as there is no government to maintain the north, and this is a great overestimation of Russia here. Now, don't think that I don't know that Russia is incapable of this. I'm pretty sure Russia would not be able to do this, as Finland would have a much more united country against Russia, if you like military wise. So yes, I know, but this is setting the stage for a later event in the video, so just take that as an entertainment aspect. So now Russia continues its push into Finland with a lot of success, but the only problem is it is now the winter months of 2022 and the Finnish are pushing back, so much so that they are already pushed back to their border down south with Finland, and in one area they reconnect with the Russian border. They push up and around the Baltic Sea, and Finland manages to recapture this much land in the winter months. When it comes time to spring of 2023, we don't have much movement, but we do have the Russians making a slight counteroffensive over here in the east of Finland, and a small push out is made from their border. Now this time the applications of Finland and Sweden have both been accepted into NATO. If you don't know, the membership process takes around about a year, but in our current timeline, I believe that it would be done a lot quicker since the threat to these two countries is very high. So yeah, we have Sweden and Finland both being admitted into NATO. Now, I'm not sure how this works, and I don't think it works at all. So if a country is being attacked and they join NATO, I don't believe that would activate NATO since they were already in active conflict. But at the same time, they wouldn't be able to join NATO if they were in an active conflict, because that's one of the requirements for NATO. No active conflict, must be at peace. So this would be interesting. I don't know if there's ever been a scenario where a incoming member has been attacked by an outside force. I don't know if that's ever happened in NATO history, and I don't know how the alliance would respond. But do note that Sweden and Finland are both NATO countries now. And that's really unfortunate timing for Russia as they start sending troops into Sweden. Now, the word about these two countries' memberships was not publicly shared for a few days after they joined, and unfortunately for Russia, they attacked in between that time period. So Russian forces push over and down into Sweden and Finland, and this activates Article 5 of NATO. So now Russia is looking like they made a big mistake, in which, you know, they kind of did. They're at war with all of Europe and half of North America. Over in Europe, we have pretty much the entire continent united against Russian aggression, with even Hungary joining in on this war. You know, Hungary's leader is pretty pro-Russian, I would say, but they decided to join in on this war anyway, as in real life they have denounced Russia's invasion of Ukraine. A big surprise, but that is mostly because of pressure from the West. But you might have noticed that there's one country not colored in on this list, and that is Turkey. Now, as of recently, Turkey's been kind of a pain in the back for NATO, as they said that they would block Sweden and Finland's NATO application. Now, in this timeline, we are assuming that Sweden and Finland fell to the demands of Turkey and did whatever they wanted, and in return for that, Turkey accepted their NATO application. So we are making that assumption, but these two countries are NATO countries, and for some reason Turkey has not joined in on this war, mostly because those promises that were made to Turkey by these two countries weren't really kept, as you know, relations aren't that great between the two. So Turkey decides to abstain from this war, which in turn gets it kicked out of NATO for not which in turn gets it kicked out of NATO for not listening to Article 5 of the alliance. And Turkey is not happy about that. But moving on from the whole Turkey thing, we have another problem for NATO, which is Russia's alliance, which is CSTO. Now, in my previous videos, I've kind of ignored this alliance simply because I forgot it existed. It's really small, but it is an alliance between Russia and a few of its neighbors. So with this war breaking out, we have Russia calling in those members, which would be Belarus, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. Now, I don't know if these Central Asian countries would actually join, because as of recently, they have been slowly moving away from Russia. Now, I say that they have been slowly moving away from Russia, but they have been moving away nonetheless. Now, would that prevent them from joining this war? With Kazakhstan, probably not, but with Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, it might be, because these two countries are in active conflict, sort of. So, would they help out Russia? Maybe. In this scenario, yes. But now we have a problem for Turkey, because they hate Armenia, and Armenia is in on this war. So what do? They don't do anything. They actually sit this one out and just kind of let it happen. Luckily for NATO, though, they do get Georgia recruited in onto their side. This is mostly because Russia is already playing their part in Georgia. Now, no one has ever corrected me for these pronunciations, therefore I will keep pronouncing them how I do. Russia still has control of South Ossetia and Abkhazia, which means that they have active personnel there. Kind of like how Russia had people in the area of Ukraine, which is known as Crimea. So with this war breaking out, we actually have the Georgian army managing to push back the Russians. As of recently, they have actually pulled troops out of Georgia in order to go fight in Ukraine. So with this, Georgia is able to push back a little bit, and they almost managed to completely kick out the Russians from their area. But the one problem for this region is that they have to fight in mountains, because, you know, this is all mountain, a famous word said by AdizzPro multiple times. Georgia does manage to make a small offensive into Armenia, but it isn't much of an offensive, as like I said, there are mountains down here. If only Turkey was in NATO still. Now, I touched on this in my previous video, but Turkey really doesn't have that many allies. They have their friend of Azerbaijan, they also have Pakistan, but other than that, they aren't super duper close with a lot of countries. And when I say super duper close, I mean like military. I would help you on the war wise. You know, we have Russia, who would always have Belarus in the war. We have the United States, who would pretty much have all of the West on their side. We have the Commonwealth, which is UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. All those guys would help each other out in the war. But when it comes to Turkey, they don't have that many close friends. So Turkey decides to go one of two ways. They can either A, go back to NATO and help out the West, or B, go to Russia and help them out. But before we talk about Turkey's decision, let's go ahead and go back to Europe. Ever since Russia's official declaration of war on Ukraine, we have a lot more troops being sent down here. Now this isn't this timeline, this isn't in real life, so I don't think that Russia has officially done so because they haven't. They're still doing special operations. So with this in mind, we have Russian and Belarusian troops storming into Ukraine, and once again we have the Kyiv region in danger. Russian troops push over and manage to capture Odessa, and with this we have all of southern Ukraine falling to Russians. Now, unfortunately for Russia though, they are unable to push down to Romania as a strong NATO brigade lies right here. Back up north in Finland and Sweden, we have the Russian troops continuing their push down into Sweden, but it is slowly coming to an end as the Swedish army has fully mobilized and is moving up north. In Norway, they are unable to advance as the mountains exist up here, so Russia is kind of in a standstill up north. Luckily for them, they are not in a standstill over here in the Baltics as Russian troops storm into Estonia and Latvia, and a small force of Belarusians push into Lithuania. Luckily for NATO though, NATO troops finally arrive in Finland, in which case we have the pushback of the Russians from southern Finland. This effect is seen throughout all of Finland as troops start to retake the country. Eventually, Russia is completely kicked out over here in the southeast. We also have the Swedish army pushing back the recently moved in Russian forces, and we have Norwegian troops pushing down from the mountains in order to cut off a large portion of Russian troops that are scattered over here in northern Sweden. This spearhead is successful as these troops are cut off, and they are slowly mowed down unless they surrender, which most of them do. Now, as for Russia, they are slowly losing their front over here in the Nordics, and eventually they are ordered to retreat, in which case they then hold a front line against the Finnish border. In addition to this, down south in Romania, where these divisions were waiting, they finally move up into Ukraine and up and around towards the Dnieper River. With this involvement in NATO troops in Ukraine, we have the application of Ukraine going into NATO, and they are officially added to the alliance. Now, a lot of other factors would have to take place in order for Ukraine to be accepted into NATO, such as the whole corruption issue and a lot of other government things, but they have gotten better in most recent years. The only thing stopping them from becoming a NATO member in present day is obviously they're in active conflict. But since they are in the same war as NATO, they are allowed into the alliance. And the same is said for Georgia, who is also admitted into NATO. So now NATO is looking as strong as ever. Although they did lose Turkey, who could be considered the second strongest NATO member, if you're like talking about manpower wise. But on the topic of Turkey, they have made their decision and they will be joining in on NATO's side. Now, this vote was held by the president of Turkey, of course, but also the government was involved in the vote, and a majority of which people voted for NATO, but a small majority did vote for joining in on Russia's side, as they have stated that the West has betrayed them. Now, if this were to actually take place in our real life and Turkey was kicked out of NATO, I doubt they would go back for any reason. But as Turkey sees a prime opportunity to jump in on Armenia, we have them joining the war anyway. Now, is this something that the West is particularly proud about? No, but they are glad to have the support of Turkey. So while Turkish troops move into Armenia and maybe start another genocide, we just kind of ignore that. Fortunately for the red team though, they can use this as propaganda in order to recruit new members. No one manages to join though, because as they start sending out requests, we have a massive NATO counteroffensive being started on the Russian borders, such as down south in Ukraine, where the northern Kiev region is completely liberated by NATO forces. We also have Belarus being kicked out of Ukraine, and Ukrainian forces start to push back down towards Crimea. Over in the Baltics, we have NATO kicking out the Russians, and at this point in the war, we have Belarus looking very attackable. Give or take a few weeks, and Belarus is looking something like this. Eventually, we have a spearhead making downwards towards Minsk, in which they managed to capture, and with this, we have NATO controlling over half of Belarus. The other half is occupied by Russia. Back down to Georgia, we have the Russians making a counteroffensive as they push into the country. They push down the coast and over into northern Turkey. From here, they managed to push down even further into the mountainous country, and over, I guess, 3/4 of the country is under Russian control. Only a small slither remains, and a lot of their army is still in Armenia trying to suppress all of the rebellions. Luckily for NATO though, Turkey recently joined back in on their side, which means that a counteroffensive is started against the Russians down south. They do manage to make a lot of progress, but eventually a line is held against Russia, and there is no movement on either side. Now, what about other countries joining in on Russia's side here? Well, like I said earlier, Russia is experiencing a lot of counterattacks, and it doesn't look like they'll be able to win this war, so no other country really dares to join in on their side, as being scared of being either, carpet bombed or just being annexed by a lot of countries. Countries that considered joining in on Russia's side would be Iran, Iraq, and Syria. We also had North Korea and China considering this, although they really just kind of threw it out the window because they're preparing for something else. So NATO manages to completely liberate all of Belarus, and even manages to start a small offensive into Kaliningrad. Finnish and NATO troops push down and over towards St. Petersburg, and back over in Ukraine, we have troops pushing over and capturing Mariupol. This is seen as a huge moral boost for the Ukrainian army, as they had recently lost this city in real life. And with this, they managed to drive Russia all the way back to Donbass. Now, while NATO troops are managing to do this, we have a large portion of Ukrainian troops pushing down south in order to capture Crimea. As Crimea is completely reliberated by Ukraine, a couple, 10-15 years later. As this would look great on Ukraine and horrible on Russia, as Ukraine manages to completely reliberate all of Crimea, 15 years after it was taken away from them. Now, by saying that, I'm saying that the current year is 2029. Would the fighting be going on for this long in real life? I don't know. This war technically started in mid-2023, so a 6-long-year war against Russia is sort of unlikely. It would probably go by faster than that, especially considering that Russia would probably use nukes. But yeah, that's just the number I made up. Anyway, back on with the fighting. NATO manages to capture St. Petersburg in a surprising victory against the Russians, as it was predicted that the Russians would hold out in this battle. And with the capturing of the city, we have NATO managing to completely push into this region of Russia, out from the Baltics and northern Belarus. And this entire region falls to NATO, as they have lost infrastructure in this area. In addition to this, we have NATO troops pushing out from Belarus and northern Ukraine. And back over in Donbass, NATO troops managed to secure all of the region. Now at this point, countries are starting to lose hope in Russia's victory, if they ever thought it was possible. Both Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan leave the war, and Kazakhstan soon follows suit. The Georgians push back the Russians in the south, and Ukrainian troops set foot into Russia. With this development and a leader who is on the brink of death, which if you didn't know, apparently Vladimir Putin has some kind of illness. Now I don't know if he would be alive in 2029, considering the illness. You know, that's 7 years down the road. He's 69 years old, which means he's 75. Maybe this illness finally caught up with him, but all we know is that he's dead, and the person that takes over Russia decided to surrender to the West. Now who would this person be? I'm not sure, but all I know is that they decided to surrender for the good of the Russian people, a decision that all of the West and the world can respect. Alright, looking at this peace treaty here, this is kind of the usual in my videos, but it's a little bit different than usual. Normally I'd give Finland all of northern Russia over here, but I decided to just kind of restore its old borders in some sort of way, but at the same time also giving them some new claims, such as down here towards St. Petersburg. In the Baltics, we have Estonia and Latvia getting some land out of Russia. We also have Lithuania getting some land out of Belarus. Lithuania is given a big chunk of Belarus, and we also have Poland restoring a lot of its old border since, well, pre-World War II. I decided to leave Kaliningrad as a part of Russia since, you know, the new Russian leader is considered to be pro-Western and is willing to cooperate with NATO. So with this, NATO decides to allow Russia to keep one of its warm water ports, which is, in this case, Kaliningrad. Over in Ukraine, we have them getting all of their land back, so all of Donbass and all of Crimea. Georgia manages to get all of its land back from Russia. And down here we have the partitioning of Armenia. Now Azerbaijan did not participate in this war, but Turkey decided to cede them some Armenian land in order for them to collect to their exclave. We have Georgia getting a little bit out of northern Armenia, and the rest going over to Turkey. As for the rest of the CSTO members, we have Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan all being forced to pay war reparations to the West. Now, since these countries are poorer than, you know, the average country, they are allowed to pay less and in a shorter amount of time, so the reparations wouldn't completely cripple their economy. Russia is also forced to pay reparations, and yeah, as well as Belarus. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. It really helps the channel out, and it helps us reach our goals, in which we are super close to hitting 50,000 subscribers. I wouldn't say this is our first huge milestone, but it's our first huge milestone. Being halfway there to a silver play button would be amazing, and seeing that silver play button on that wall back there would be even more amazing. I never really thought that I could take YouTube to the extent of which I would receive such, you know, an honorary item, but here I am, almost halfway there. So once again, if you guys want to help me out and reach my goals and sort of my dreams, then make sure to subscribe. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.